Welcome to our channel BritNews Update. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a really significant and fast-moving story in UK politics. That's the Labour government's recent U-turn on its, well, pretty ambitious welfare reform bill.
Yes, and for this particular deep dive, we're drawing quite heavily on detailed reporting from both BBC News and Sky News. We'll try to give you some crucial insights into, what exactly happened, why this reversal matters so much, and maybe some of the broader questions it raises. Questions about the UK's social landscape, its economy. It's all interconnected, really.
Absolutely. We'll start by looking at the immediate political fallout, the repercussions of the decision, and then we'll carefully unpack the complex issues underneath it all, the things that kind of forced this policy shift. Because this isn't just about a government changing its mind, is it? It's really about understanding the huge challenges facing the UK's welfare system, and how any government, frankly, tries to navigate these incredibly tough financial pawls, especially with pressure at home and, well, this global economic currents, too. Okay, so to begin then, let's unpack this major policy reversal. What were the core changes the government first put forward? And what sort of pressure specifically led to this, well, pretty rapid U-turn?
Well, according to the reports, BBC News included, the government confirmed some major concessions. This was really in response to significant pressure. We're talking over 100 Labour backbenchers pushing back. The Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, she stated very clearly that current claimants of PIP, that's the personal independence payment.
Right, the benefit for long-term health conditions or disabilities.
Exactly. Those current claimants will continue to get their existing benefits. And crucially, the same goes for people receiving the health element of universal credit. So what this means in practice is that the planned cuts, the tightening, that now only applies to future claimants, not people already in the system.
That is a truly significant shift. It must affect a lot of people directly. So what was the original plan then? What was the aim behind these reforms in the first place? And what exactly were the proposed cuts that caused such a backlash, not just from backbenchers, but presumably wider groups too?
The original goal was substantial savings, no doubt about it. The government was aiming to save £5 billion a year by 2030. That was through this universal credit and personal independence payment bill. It was a bold target. BBC News outlined how the changes were designed to, well, significantly tighten eligibility for PIP. For example, new claimants would have needed to prove a much higher degree of difficulty with daily tasks. Things like preparing food, getting dressed.
Yeah.
The bar was going to be raised quite a bit. The main goal, from the government's viewpoint, was to slow down the really rapid rise in the number of people claiming health-related benefits. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, they'd estimated that without reforms, spending in this area could pretty much double.
Double, wow.
Yes, to a staggering £66 billion by 2029. So you can see the financial imperative was pretty strong from their perspective.
And what makes this particular U-turn really stand out is that it's not just a one-off. It seems to be part of a recent pattern, doesn't it?
It really does, yes. BBC News flagged this up quite clearly. This is actually the third government U-turn in just 1 month, which is, quite something for any government, especially one that's relatively new. It came after reversals on changes to winter fuel payments and, maybe even more politically charged, that initial resistance to holding a public inquiry into grooming gangs. And this pattern, this series of concessions. Well, a coordinating Rebel MP told BBC News it significantly emboldened many backbenchers. MPs who might have previously felt they had to toe the line, even on unpopular measures. Seeing these repeated shifts showed them that, actually, sustained pressure could lead to policy changes. It definitely shifts the internal dynamic.
And how did the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, how did he respond publicly, especially given the political look of reversing policy so quickly?
Sky News reported on Sir Keir Starmer's defense. It was quite robust, actually. He stated pretty plainly, his words were, "Getting it right is more important than plowing on with a package which doesn't necessarily achieve the desired outcome." He very explicitly took public ownership, of all his government's decisions, framing it not really as weakness, but more as a kind of pragmatic adjustment, making sure the policy works. It was a clear attempt to manage the narrative.
Okay, so that's the immediate politics. But what does this really mean for the government's wider economic strategy, its overall agenda? Why were these cuts seen as so vital in the first place? What was the immediate financial squeeze driving them right now?
Right, and this is where you really see those intense fiscal pressures coming into play. According to some insightful analysis by Faisal Islam at BBC News, a key driver was the government's determination to avoid at all costs a repeat of the economic chaos sparked by the Liz Truss mini-budget.
Ah, yes, that period of market turmoil.
Precisely. That whole episode really spooked the financial markets, pushed up borrowing costs significantly. So the current chancellor, Rachel Reeves, she needed to meet what she calls her non-negotiable borrowing rules. These are basically the government's self-imposed targets, designed to show markets the UK is financially stable, get the national debt down. But these rules, these targets, they've been blown off course, partly by higher borrowing costs generally, but also influenced by, wider global economic stuff. Things like the ripple effect from U.S. President Donald Trump's shock tariffs, creating uncertainty, increasing costs internationally. So this welfare reform plan, aiming for that £5 billion a year saving by 2029-30. BBC analysis suggests it was actually brought forward specifically to help plug that budget gap, to meet those crucial fiscal targets.
It certainly sounds like maybe a short-term solution being applied to what seems like a much bigger, longer-term structural issue. What did the independent experts say about this? Or even people within the Labour Party itself? What was their take on this approach?
You've hit on a really critical point there. BBC News reported that many independent experts questioned the approach. They asked whether more of those potential savings shouldn't have been perhaps redeployed. Their argument was, instead of just cutting, maybe use the funds to actively help people with ill health get back into work, maybe part-time initially.
Through things like training, subsidies?
Exactly. Things like employer subsidies, bespoke training programs, that sort of thing. And labor rebels, as BBC News detailed, they echoed this feeling. They argued the upfront cuts felt more like an emergency cost-cutting exercise, a quick fix for the budget, rather than a genuine, thought-through program of welfare reform designed for the long haul. So yeah, a definite sense of disconnect between the immediate money need and the maybe deeper policy aims.
And this whole situation, it does bring historical parallels to mind, doesn't it? We've sort of seen similar attempts at finding savings in the welfare system before.
Absolutely. And the echoes of the past seem quite loud here. Ian Duncan Smith, you'll remember him, the former Conservative welfare secretary. He was quoted in BBC News. He recalled a very similar plan to cut disability benefits nearly a decade ago. He described that plan as indefensible. And he argued quite forcefully that, quote, top slicing never works when you're trying to get savings from the welfare budget without a much wider structured reform process.
Top slicing. What does he mean by that exactly?
It's essentially the practice of just taking a fixed amount off the top of the budget. Often seems a bit arbitrary. It doesn't really address the underlying reasons why spending is rising or fundamentally change how the system works. His argument, based on experience, is that these kinds of superficial cuts rarely deliver long-term savings. And they often just create new problems or shift costs onto other public services. This is a powerful critique, especially coming from him.
Okay, so moving beyond the immediate political drama and the financial drivers, this deep dive really throws up some fundamental questions, doesn't it, about the whole state of welfare in the UK. It forces us to ask, is Britain actually becoming a sicker nation? Or are there deeper systemic problems with the welfare system itself that are pushing up these costs?
That really is the crux of it, and the sources provide some pretty stark figures. BBC News highlights that around a quarter, 1 in 4 of the working age population, so that's 16 to 64-year-olds, they don't currently have a job. And the most common reasons given: caring responsibilities and, critically, ill health. And the spending on health-related benefits for this working age group, it's jumped significantly, from $36 billion in 2019 to $52 billion in 2024.
Wow, that's a huge increase in just 5 years.
It really is. It's not just a minor adjustment. It points to either a profound shift in society's health or a major challenge within the system itself, or maybe both.
And what's particularly interesting from the analysis is the talk around the actual structure of the welfare system, how that structure might be perhaps inadvertently contributing to these rising numbers.
Indeed. A core problem, highlighted in BBC News reports and sometimes referred to by ministers, is what they call the hard boundary, the binary nature of the current system. What that means is the system often forces a very stark choice. You're either declared fit for work or unfit for work. There's often very little gray area, very little in between.
Right, like an off switch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the argument is that this rigidity can unintentionally push people toward declaring themselves completely unfit for work just to secure financial support. This can lead to total dependence on welfare, rather than enabling a more gradual, supported return to employment, perhaps part-time. Many leading experts actually believe this binary structure is a major underlying factor in the dramatic rise in health-related claims. It's a trend that certainly sped up with the pandemic, but BBC News notes it actually started over a decade ago.
Mm.
We've seen the proportion of working-age people on incapacity benefits rise from well below 5% back in 2015 to 7% today. It shows this ongoing shift.
And within this really complex picture, there are also claims, controversial ones perhaps, that some people might be exploiting the system. That always comes up in these discussions.
Yes, it does. It's a sensitive area. BBC News reported comments from a former minister who wasn't named. This person suggested the system had, in their view, effectively broken down in some respects. They claimed people were learning to game the PIP questionnaire with help from internet sites. This source also suggested the UK is, quote, at the extreme of paying people for being disabled with cash, rather than using more in-kind support.
What sort of in-kind support?
Things like specialist equipment, therapies, tailored services to help manage conditions or get back towards work. The viewpoint here is that while cash offers autonomy, it might not always be the best way to support long-term well-being or reintegration. However, it's really crucial to stress, BBC News also presented the strong counter-argument from disability campaigners. They view the idea of being offered vouchers instead of cash as an insult, even dangerous. Their argument is that it fundamentally removes people's autonomy, their dignity, their ability to manage their own lives and meet their specific needs as they see fit. It highlights a really deep tension in welfare philosophy.
So the U-turns happened. It gives some breathing room for current claimants, definitely, but it clearly comes with a big price tag. How is the government actually planning to cover the costs of backing down on these cuts, especially given those financial pressures that drove the plan in the first place?
Yes, the cost is significant. The estimate is around £3 billion. That figure comes from independent bodies like the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the Resolution Foundation, both cited by BBC News. So Chancellor Rachel Reeves almost certainly needs to find that money somewhere else. The likelihood is she'll need to either raise taxes in the autumn budget or make further cuts to spending in other government departments, all to meet those self-imposed fiscal rules we talked about.
Any ideas on where the axe might fall or taxes might rise?
Well, extending the freeze on income tax thresholds, again, that's seen as a plausible option, according to BBC News. It's politically maybe less painful than other tax rises, though it does mean more people get dragged into paying more tax as wages rise with inflation fiscal drag, they call it. Downing Street, again reported by BBC News, has said the exact details will come in the autumn budget. But they've given reassurance that there will be, quote, no permanent increase in borrowing to fund this. That commitment will be watched very closely.
This whole episode really shines a light on that difficult balancing act, doesn't it? Balancing immediate short-term financial needs against those much broader long-term goals for society. Is the government's approach just firefighting the budget deficit, or is there a bigger vision for reform somewhere in all this?
That is precisely the challenge, isn't it? Now, the government has pulled forward £1 billion, reportedly, to help people with disabilities find work sooner. BBC News mentioned this, so there is some investment there. But it's still widely considered by many experts not to be that fully fledged radical reform they believe is urgently required. Many observers see the current situation as more than just a budget problem. They're using terms like a social, fiscal, and economic crisis that needs a much more comprehensive root and branch overhaul. And we're also still waiting for the results of the Keep Britain Working review. That's being led by Sir Charlie Mayfield. It was set up specifically to look into the role employers can, and maybe should, play in supporting health and disability in the workplace. Its findings could be really crucial.
Are there examples from other countries? How have they tried to get to grips with similar challenges around welfare and disability costs? Any alternative models?
BBC News did mention one example, the Netherlands. They tackled a similar challenge about 2 decades ago. And their approach was quite different. They essentially made employers primarily responsible for the costs of helping people get back to work, covering the first 2 years of their absence due to sickness. Now, that's a significant shift. It places a lot of the burden, but also the incentive, directly onto businesses, encouraging them to be proactive in supporting employee health and return-to-work schemes. It certainly offers a different perspective on how you can distribute those responsibilities and financial levers across society.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive then, looking ahead, what do you think are the big lingering questions that come out of this whole episode, the things that perhaps you, our listener, should really be thinking about?
Well, BBC News itself posed several really profound questions that are still hanging in the air. Firstly, is Britain fundamentally getting sicker? Or is what we're seeing primarily a symptom of a welfare system that itself needs reevaluating? Secondly, if work is the best route for many, can employers genuinely cope with the scale of supporting people with health conditions? Are there even enough suitable jobs out there? Or, looking back, did past welfare cuts perhaps unintentionally contribute to the rise in claims we're seeing now? Does that suggest the system needs a completely different kind of reform, more focused on support and prevention, maybe, than just cost reduction? And then there's the crucial political question. Has the government, in chasing that narrow goal of budget credibility, actually ended up losing some political credibility by not being able to see through its initial major plans? These are really the tough questions that are going to continue to shape the debate about the future of welfare in the UK for some time to come.
It certainly gives us and you a lot to consider. The sheer complexity of welfare reform in the UK, especially when it crashes into economic realities.
Understanding these different dynamics, these pressures, it's absolutely key, I think, to appreciating the very difficult tightrope any government has to walk, managing the nation's finances on one hand and the health and well-being of its citizens on the other.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Goodbye. See you next video.